See through you, see your true color.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun.
I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Listen to Pavarotti. Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm Yost Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And wife and I had an excellent time yesterday fishing. I bet we caught 30, 40 fish, none of them bigger than our hand. Prettiest little striped bass you've ever seen. And apparently brim and bass are, I didn't even know that they could hybridize, but somehow brim and bass are now hybrids. Maybe they've always been hybrids and we just never caught any, but must have caught 20 of those, the weirdest looking fish you ever seen. Look exactly like a bass, but brim color. But anyway, we had a great time. And now it's back to the old grind. And I did that little video that I put out yesterday, and I wanted to make sure I got that out there so nobody gets confused. And I know a lot of people say, well, Pop, your theory makes sense. You got to understand that my theory is not a theory. It's the culmination of a extreme investigation into this case and the facts around it that continue to this day. And if I ever see anything that negates my theory, then I'll shut up. Until this point, though, I've seen so many things that affirm it that it would have to be pretty massive to negate it at this point. But make no mistake, I don't believe that's the only thing going on around this case. I mean, there is several different things that you have to look for in this case because nothing is as it seems. And oh, by the way, as you go through these forensic reports, I know a lot of people won't take the time and effort to go through and log all the evidence so they can figure out who's what in the redactions. And by not doing that, you can get confused on some things really easily. For example, Dylan's jacket and Dylan's blanket that the defense had tested for blood, they absolutely had those things tested for blood. When they got the results back from those, they probably didn't continue to pursue that area because of the results that they got back. For example, Dylan's jacket here, although pretty dirty, didn't test positive for blood anywhere. However, her blanket did. This blanket right here tested positive for blood. But if you look in the actual results of the forensics on the blanket, you'll find out. Let me show you. Okay, so when you go to this report, this is the forensic report of item 132.1, stain near the top left corner of blanket from Dylan Mortenson's bedroom. And then item 134 is the DNA extract from item 132.1. So this is how you fill in what the missing blanks are as you go through and you log all the evidence. We knew 132.1 and 132 was the stain, or was Dylan's blanket. Now we know item 134 is the extract from the stain on Dylan's blanket that they created a DNA profile from. And you can see that they created they used PCR and created a short tandem repeat STR profile from 132.1. The DNA profile obtained from 132.1 matches that obtained from the known reference sample from Dylan. See item 19, report number 4. See item 19. Wait a minute. Item 19, DNA buccal swab, Dylan Mortenson. See, if you have this, you got everything. And then it says this DNA profile is at least 77.4 septillion times more likely to be seen if Dylan Mortenson is the source than if an unrelated individual randomly selected from the general population is the source. So the blood on the jacket belonged to Dylan. Or blood on the, sorry, not on the jacket. There's no blood on the jacket. Blood on the blanket belonged to Dylan. Now, when you have blood on a blanket from a young lady's bedroom, it's hard to attach that blood to a crime when it's their own blood And if you think about it, young ladies have a propensity for getting blood on their jacket, especially if they're heavy drinkers. And by the way, when you go through these reports of the DNA extracts, it gives you so much information in these reports. See if this one does. You just have to be able to look for it. Okay, so you'll see that on 132.1, it has one contributor. It means it's a single source profile. It's just Dylan's blood. And it'll tell you the mixture proportion, 100%. And I mean, it gives you a ton of information. Actually, it even gives the allele variance in this one. But yeah, and it even does likelihood ratios like they do with everybody else. But the weight, when you go through these reports and you look at the weight and it's 100%, that means it's a pretty strong profile. They had a lot of weight as it relates to the DNA. You'll go through some of them where that'll give you the percentage of the mixture. Like when you're on evidence surrounding, for instance, DNA under victims' fingernails or blood on the back of the knife sheath, it'll literally tell you the breakdown of the contributors to each DNA. Like it'll say Kaylee has 78% of that DNA is Kaylee's. The minor secondary DNA in there, Maddie's, is 18%, and the unknown perpetrator is 8%. I mean, it'll literally break that down. They had a pretty good idea of whose DNA or how much DNA was in each one of these samples. That's why they were able to exclude suspects from it. Unfortunately, when they exclude Koberger from the same evidence, it doesn't have the same impact in the investigation. But this stuff will tell you so much about these samples. But no, the blood on the blanket is Dylan's, and we can all imagine where that probably came from, and it wasn't a crime. We said, well, look, Pop's trying to take up for Dylan. Well, it couldn't be further from the truth. But when you're going through and you're looking at evidence in the case, look at real evidence. I mean, there's enough evidence against Dylan where we shouldn't have to go through and start making up evidence. And that's what kind of frustrates me about whenever all this new information comes out, people will take and distort things and start making up evidence against people. There's enough evidence there against everybody in this case. You don't have to make anything up. But that brings me to my next point. All right, because I gave y'all exactly what my investigation is determined to be the cause of this situation in the video yesterday. Backed it up with a statement from Dylan Mortensen herself. That is not the only thing going on in this entire case, though. I believe that's the only thing that caused the atrocity. And there's several different factors around the atrocity, though, that you have to be aware of. And that's what I really dive into the details on to try to verify if my assumptions of what I'm seeing of the events surrounding the atrocity are correct or not. And when you really break it down, you've got 4 entities involved in this investigation. You have, obviously, the FBI. You have the University of Idaho, major entity involved. You have Moscow PD, very involved. But you also have the Idaho State Police. They're involved as well. And I believe that each one of them have different reasons for wanting to hide some of the evidence in this case as it relates to events surrounding this case. And let me explain what I'm saying, because it's going to really have a big impact as we get further in this video, and I'm going to show you something that you're going to find very interesting. All right, so let's talk about some things we know about the 4 entities that are really involved in this investigation. Because we know we have the FBI assisting Moscow PD. You have the Idaho State Police assisting Moscow PD. And remember, the Idaho State Police consists of their investigators, the lab there at the state lab in Meridian, all the lab techs, and then you have the University of Idaho kind of running interference for everybody. And when we look at the FBI, I mean, it's not too hard to determine that during the time of the atrocity, it is now well documented that the FBI, working alongside their OCD ETF, as I've said 1,000 times, had a massive investigation into the Aryan family and the Aryan Knights drug trafficking organizations during the time of the atrocity. It wasn't like they were looking into these groups, at a different time. No, they were actually investigating both groups because of the trafficking route that was coming from basically starting in Seattle once they got the drugs there to Spokane, over into Idaho, all the way down through Boise, and then beyond that. It was an established organization with an established trafficking route. They were investigating them. We know that. And strangely enough, during the time of the atrocity is when their investigation was really hitting ahead, and it culminated just a few months after the atrocity with all the arrests. So that is a verified fact. That stuff was going right through there. We verified all the players involved and how they tie to the families in this case, which in turn leads us to all the other evidence surrounding the atrocity stemming from that. And their investigation methods as they worked that big case entailed the use of confidential informants. It's documented through the entire investigation that confidential informants were giving up information on these Aryan prison drug trafficking organizations. So why would the FBI want to cover up for a lot in this investigation or in the atrocity on King Road? Well, because if methods that they used in their investigation to take down these Aryan drug trafficking organizations, if that's what caused the atrocity on King Road, well, the last thing the FBI would want to get out is their investigation is what caused this tragedy that has hit worldwide notoriety. All right? That's pretty simple right there. But then you've got the MPD. Now, why would the MPD want to cover up things around this case? Well, that's curious to me because we know that they're covering up for the movements that night of two of their officers, Rosie and Tisdale, because their very own police report describes exactly what they were doing that night. And, they would not write a police report describing them driving around the Queen Road apartments and the King Road residence, all those passes. There's no way they would write that police report and falsify themselves, putting themselves right there at the crime, just to later go back and try to cover up for it. No, they wrote a police report explaining what they did that night, and then something else happened that made them want to cover that up. But then you've also got the MPD that I believe is covering up for a likely manipulated 911 call. I believe that the 911 call happened much earlier. It probably wasn't a direct 911 call to 911. It was probably a call to the university first, which at that point, only select people would know what happened between the time that the university was contacted, law enforcement showed up incognito, and the official 911 call that the public has been privy to. Now, I think that is a real reason to cover up some things in this case. But then you got the University of Idaho. What's their role? Simple. They want to cover up for the real reason the atrocity happened, i.e. if drug gangs killing college students got out, then their entire college, their town, their current purchase of the University of Phoenix, that was all gone. So they had to cover that up. But I think they also wanted to cover up for scandals involving somebody that was seeing Kaylee. And it could have been somebody of power in the university, could have been an officer of the law, or it could have been both. And that's what I want to dig in deeper to try to uncover, is why would they want that covered up? But when you get to the Idaho State Police, I believe you've got an organization here that was just kind of out of the loop of the real info. It appears to me they truly investigated everything that they were told to investigate, and it seems like they were doing it with integrity. Even when you listen to the Gooch interview of Dylan Mortensen, if you listen to that, in fact, let's talk about that for just a second. So when you listen to the Gooch interview of Dylan Mortensen, and it's very difficult to even listen to those types of interviews from the right perspective, because usually you have a content creator that's going to be stopping it and interjecting their opinion throughout the whole thing, which will skew your perception of what's going on. That's why whenever I listen to them, I try to, if a content creator is one that put it out, I try to fast forward through their comments so that I don't get skewed by what they're saying. because I'm sure that they're going to go through and they're going to, say Gooch is doing this terrible, this terrible, this terrible. Well, try to go listen. If you've already listened to it with, that perspective, try listening to it again. But this time, try listening to it without listening to the commentary around it. But listen to it with the right frame of mind to what it is that's going on. Remember, when Gooch interviews Dylan Mortensen, right? This is on the 17th of November. This is 4 days later. She's already been interviewed at least twice at this point before this interview ever takes place. When this interview takes place, unlike the first two, where she was interviewed outside the crime scene and at the MPD by Blaker, I believe, this interview takes place with Dylan Mortensen's attorney present, okay? So when the investigators get there to interview Dylan Mortensen, what we're not hearing is the conversation that took place between the investigators, Dylan and her attorney, before they turned the microphone on. And her attorney, I'm sure, has heard the story enough to be able to know what was something Dylan didn't need to speak a whole lot about. And they would have told the detectives before they questioned their client, look, when it gets into these areas, you're not gonna dig in on those. She's not gonna answer those questions. And you can bet most of those questions pertain to what happened after the atrocity, between the time of the atrocity and the 911 call. They probably told them to be very general there. Now, keeping that in mind, knowing that Gooch went into this with an attorney sitting there, and she wanted Dylan to be able to talk, and she was trying to learn real information. And if you listen close to that interview, you'll be able to see that. But also, the way that she's conducting the interview, she's having to do it in a way where it keeps Dylan talking. She wants Dylan talking, and she wants to know what really happened. And that's a smart interviewer will always want the person that they're interviewing to talk as much as possible, because the more they talk, the more they either tell the truth or incriminate themselves or tell lies that they can later and verify that are a lie. So listen to that interview again with that perspective, because what you're going to hear in there is a lot of real questions. Gooch was really trying to get to the bottom of some things. And I know at one point she said, now, I know that, those were things that you and Blaker had discussed. Try to put those out of your mind. I don't want your words to be skewed by anything that you had discussed with Blaker. She had already read the Blaker report, or probably watched the interview, and she knew that Blaker had pushed her in certain directions on some things, and she was trying to wipe that clean and get to some real truth. So listen to that interview again, and I think what you're going to find is, under the circumstances, Gooch was really trying to get to some real information in there. She just had her, she had her hands shackled with previous statements and an attorney sitting right there in front of them. Keep that in mind. My point to that is, I haven't seen anything in this investigation, in all of the reports that have been released, that doesn't show that the ISP was above board almost 100%, right down to the lab techs. Now, when you get into the lab, if there's any manipulation being done, I don't believe it's going to be done by any of those lab techs. Any manipulation that was done, you have to go right to the top, to the two people that were in question that Ann Taylor put on the stand and really hammered. And that was the two people that was in charge of that lab and in charge of procuring IgG for the state of Idaho. And that's Rylene Nolan and Matthew Gammett. But I believe you can absolutely believe the reports of the forensic techs in this case. And if you really look at those reports close, you can see they were trying to do their job, and there were some things that was hampering them from doing their job, and you can see specifically who was hampering them of those things, and it was the FBI. And I'll show you that in later videos. But all that to bring you back to this: the 911 call and manipulations around it. And that's why I keep bringing you things like the Hunter knife. Now, I tried to show y'all in a video the other day when Nunez and Hunter are first walking up the stairs, you can see the knife laying on the ground at the top of the stairs where Hunter laid it down. Later on, Hunter picks up the knife to show Nunez he has him put it on that table. He puts it on the table. All right, that knife, that is not blood on the blade of the knife. It would be in the forensic lab reports. It's probably peanut butter or something. But that is definitely blood around that knife. And that blood around that knife, you can clearly see was set on the table with the knife. That's Kaylee's blood. Now, does that say that Hunter is the unaliver? Give me a break. If you think law enforcement's going to cover up for Hunter being the unaliver, then you have no reason to be in the true crime community, okay? However, would they cover up for all the events around that 911 call? And I say absolutely, because once they decided to create those events around that 911 call, they created an issue for themselves. And what does that show? If Hunter has blood on his hands when he sets that knife down and it's Kaylee's, it shows that Hunter had been upstairs before all this happened, before this 911 call happened. And I think something else that's going to go a long way in proving that is the statements from Dylan's friend that we have covered many times in their text messages. And she texted and called Dylan and Bethany quite a few times. All the way up, she was texting Bethany all the way up through the calling of 911 and even past that. Now, you can see when Nunez arrives, and when he turns around, look right here. All right, there is no car right there. We know that Toyota RAV4 is going to be there in just a few minutes. And as Nunez is walking in, now this is supposed to be Dylan, Bethany, Josie, and Emily, and Hunter right here. I guess that was them. That one looked like a dude to me. But as Nunez walks upstairs and he gets to the top, you're going to clearly see the knife right here. That's the knife that's later put on the table. Now, I could do this with any other body cams, but I'm just using here's Snyder's, for example, about 20 minutes later. And you see when he walks up, the knife's no longer on the floor right here. Hunter's already picked it up and he's put it on that table. And you can see as he walks by, he's going to take a picture of the knife on the table. All right, so that's where the knife was, and that's where he put it, and that's why Emily said when she went up the stairs, she seen the knife laying at the top of the stairs, because that's where Hunter had originally put it. The cops told him to put it on the table. But what's important is there's no Toyota RAV4 sitting here when Nunez arrives. And then just a little bit later, you'll see Snyder as he's taking pictures at 12:18 here. You'll see there is the Toyota RAV4. Whose is that?
What's your date of birth?
2003.
And what's a good phone number for you? And what's a good address for you? Okay. So what do you know?
So I texted back this morning when I woke up to ask her to, I just asked her if she was awake because I wanted to get coffee or something, and she called me about an hour later and said, hey, like we're kind of, me and Dylan are like in my room right now, like the rest of our roommates aren't answering, they're just kind of freaked out, and I heard Dylan on the phone in the background like talking to someone saying like I saw somebody or something, and I just didn't know what was going on, and I was like, okay, that's weird, like I'm concerned for you guys, like do you guys want me to come pick you up? And she was like, honestly, yeah, like, can you just come over? And I was like, sure. And I was driving there, and she texted me and said, also on the way, just to check things out.
Okay.
And then, right when I pulled up, I'm pretty sure I rolled in right as the police were behind me.
Okay.
So I parked to the side, and, like, kind of near, like, in front of the house. And then the police came. The police were behind me.
Okay.
So I parked to the side, and, like, kind of near, like, in front of the house. And then the police came.
So that means that the RAV4 parked right here in front of the house, right over to the side, that wasn't there when Nunez arrived, is actually Jenna's, which brings up a new question. The real evidence shows is this. At 4:24:39, Dylan calls Ethan, also attempting to contact Ethan through Snapchat. 4:24:58, Dylan texts Bethany, "I'm scared or screwed though." 4:25:16, Bethany back to Dylan, "Yeah, I know, but it's better than being alone." This is when I believe Dylan left her room and headed down to Bethany's room. She exited her room and began running toward Bethany's bedroom. And then these outgoing calls are made starting at 4:27:11, which is about a minute and 55 seconds later. But when it says Dylan exited her room and began running towards Bethany's bedroom, well, that's really, I think, true. She ran towards Bethany's bedroom, right down those stairs and right out that front door. Either her or Bethany did. And where did they end up? One of them or both of them ended up in a car outside of the King Road residence. And that car could have been one of those Toyota RAV4s that we seen in the body cam parked next to 1112. Because when you hear the door shut exactly between these times on the 1112 King Road video, I don't think it can be mistaken. It's got to be either Dylan or Bethany leaving that house and going and getting in a car and shutting that door. I believe it was Dylan going right down those stairs, out that front door, getting in that car, and then making these 3 outgoing calls. And this is why I say that. Now, you can hear that door shut at the exact time, in my opinion, where she would have been coming out the front door. And it looks to me like she probably headed right down to this little Toyota right here, because it's a lot closer to that camera where you'd hear that door shut. And either one or both of them got in this thing and started placing those 3 calls. And I believe those 3 calls were to the person driving that black Ford Explorer that we're going to see here really, really soon after that. Now, when this vehicle pulls up, you'll clearly see it's not a truck. I mean, it's that Ford Explorer. You can see the back of it right there, and look in these windows for a reflection of the tail lights. And that's going to tell you it did not pull far enough to where it could have turned in between King and Queen. It pulled right into the driveway where it sat till the next day, until a long time after that. Never once does it appear in these windows. And we now have too many comparisons to show that it made the King Road driveway. So now that we know that this vehicle belongs to Jenna McClure and it wasn't there when the 911 call cop showed up, that messes that theory up, doesn't it? Not exactly. Because I believe that the evidence showed that Dylan came out of that house right as the text state, got into a car right here and shut the door. We hear it. The black Ford Explorer then pulls in, and the reason we don't see his taillights initially is because he likely stopped next to Dylan in that car, and then they spoke. And then the cameras go dark at 4:30 as that Ford Explorer pulls into the driveway where you see it the next morning. And then it's likely you see that car go across Linda Lane right there, and it's going to turn left on Blake and then left down Sorority Row. I think that's likely that same RAV4 probably being driven by Dylan or Bethany as it leaves out of the King Road residence between the 4:30 and 4:45 mark, where everything curiously doesn't exist as far as camera footage. And we know it wasn't that black Ford Explorer because the sound wasn't there that the black Ford Explorer exhibits. And I know I've read you this police report where it talks about Maury late in 2023 and the 1112 King Road camera. And it says on October 17th, he received an email from Bill Thompson or Ashley Jennings in reference to downloading additional video from the security camera seized from the residence at 1112 King Road. Previously, the video had been downloaded from the camera for the approximate time frame of 2:30 to 4:30. And these videos were downloaded and contained audio. Though different methods using forensically acquired data from the camera's SD card, additional videos were downloaded. However, they did not include the audio. They didn't want to hear Dylan shutting that door. I was requested to download videos to include audio from the approximate time frames of 4:45 to noon on November 13th. So we had video from 2:30 to 4:30, and we wanted additional video and additional audio. So instead of going from 4:30 to noon, they conveniently go from 4:45 to noon. Now, in what sense does that make in any realm of sense, right? What about the 15 minutes between 4:30 and 4:45 that I believe would show Dylan or Bethany or both leaving in that RAV4? And they go on to say that they downloaded additional videos from 4:45 to noon or to 12:05. Look, they got an extra 5 minutes on the back end, but not on the front end. And this is further verified by the state's exhibit list for the trial. What you can clearly see right here, when it got to State's Exhibit S4-185, MPD item 856, 1112 King Road, video from 4:45 to 12:05, just like in the police report. So they were going to use video from 2:30 to 4:30 and then 4:45 to 12:05. But nobody even requested that 15 minutes between 3:30 and 4:45, which tells you something happened in that 15 minutes that they don't want people to know about. And then it goes on to list the documentation of the camera repair, as if that's a way for them to manipulate Tisdale and Rosie's anyway. But yeah, straight documentation of them eliminating 15 minutes of that video that they didn't want anybody to see. And I believe they eliminate that 15 minutes because that's the 15 minutes that would show whoever was in the black Ford Explorer, probably, in my opinion, Hunter or Maisie or both, pulling into the driveway, Dylan and Bethany pulling out in Jenna McClure's RAV4 and going down the street until the morning when the 911 call BS happens. Now, I know what you're going to say. Yeah, but Pav, that's not Dylan and Bethany's car. That's Jenna McClure's car. Well, we know that because Dylan didn't have a car and Bethany's car was wrecked. But the fact that Jenna McClure parked there the next morning would indicate to me that that's a likely place that she would usually park. And I know from the sound of the door shutting on that camera at 1112 that the vehicle that shut their door right then was fairly close to the 1112 camera. And since we couldn't see it with our own eyes, tells me it was likely in that spot where Jenna McClure parked the next day. But here's the thing. I'm not saying that Jenna McClure was at the house during the time of the atrocity. But if, let's just say, for instance, Jenna McClure practically lived at the King Road residence. Let's just say that she hadn't officially moved in, but she practically lived there. And on a night where they're going out to do a lot of drinking and they're all walking, nobody's driving, she would probably park her car where she would normally park her car at the place that she practically lives at. So I'm not saying that Jenna McClure was there. She was probably out partying and staying somewhere else that night. But I imagine she would have left her car parked in an area where she practically lived. And if she did, well, it's likely that Dylan or Bethany maybe had a key to that thing because they were such good friends. So that would mean that Jenna McClure would need to practically live at the King Road residence though, Pav. Let's hear what she says.
Did you know the code to get in?
I do,
Okay.
yeah.
Is it something common for the friends to know?
I was supposed to move in at semester or next year. So I've just been like basically living there.
Okay.
So yeah, I just knew the code because I'm really close with them. So I've just been like basically living there.
My point to all this is you don't have to make up evidence and scenarios when actual evidence is right in front of your face for you to get closer to the truth instead of creating a bunch of conspiracies that just confuse the masses. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, your thoughts, your criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.